There's the birthday shout out. I love it. All right, if you guys would give another round of applause to all these guys that head off the stage. Cool. Yeah, it's a huge privilege of mine to be able to walk alongside these guys to hear their stories. Jason acknowledged that there were just as many stories first service, and that was not even all the students who wanted to share. God was up to some incredible things this last week, and it was such a huge privilege to be a part of. One of the things I want you to know is just how well taken care of your students are. So there are a bunch of leaders that came up with us during this week who, many of them had to take a week off work. They had a lot that was going on in their lives, but they set it aside to be able to come up with us for a week. And camp, it runs you ragged, it really does. And if you're a counselor, you need to be up pretty early to get to counselor meetings, and there's all these activities and events, and not everyone is as young as we used to be, and so eventually it just kind of catches up with you. And you can see it. On the last day of camp, you see it, that all the leaders, they're exhausted, they're tired, they are ready to go home. But encrusted in their exhausted faces is this little smile that never left. They're just so filled with joy over what God has done over the course of that week. And as they fully poured themselves out, they got to witness God do some incredible things in the lives of these students. And I just love working with some of these leaders who I get to partner with. So your students are in good hands. They're in really good hands. And it's been awesome to see what God did this last week. What I kind of want to do here is help us all to understand a little bit about what we were trying to do at camp. Because the message that the students heard at camp is something that all of us need to wrestle with. It's not something that's simply meant for a mountaintop. It's the kind of challenge that we all have to evaluate in ourselves from time to time. So if you've been around the last couple of weeks, you know that we're in a series that we're calling In Motion. And we've been doing it out of the book of Philippians, but this morning we're going to depart from that just a little bit. Instead, we're going to look at the book of John. So if you have your Bibles, go ahead and open up to the book of John. We're going to be all over the book today. But we're still looking at this basic theme, in motion, because really, if there's one thing I picked up on camp, it was this idea that we need to be a people in motion. And Craig, the speaker there, helped us understand some of that. And so I'm going to share with you some of the same kinds of things that he shared with us over the course of this last week, just kind of through my own filters. Because here's the thing, it's very possible to be in motion and still go absolutely nowhere. One of the things I really don't understand about life, one of the things that just kind of puzzles me, is why we are willing to spend so much money on theme parks. It's $96 right now for a ticket to Disneyland. $150 if you want the park hopper. That's a lot of money. I don't want to knock Disneyland. Apparently I have a reputation now for demeaning businesses. I promise you that KFC has had chicken most of the time I've been there. Disneyland's great. I really enjoy it. I'm not even sure why I enjoy it all the time, because here's the thing. Here's what you do when you go to a theme park. You wait in line sometimes for an hour for this ride. You get on the ride, and it takes you around, and you finish right where you started. That's the whole experience. You just go right back to where you started. We pay a lot of money and spend a lot of time to do that. So theme parks are just kind of one of those funny animals, and roller coasters are just kind of baffle me. When I was a high schooler, I had this little game. It was called Roller Coaster Tycoon. And the idea was you could create your own theme park and you could create your own roller coaster. And building the roller coasters was one of the most fun for me. And just kind of roller coaster construction 101 was you always had to make it so that the roller coaster ended where it started. The game, however, did not make you do that, so you got to find out what kind of bad things happened if you didn't follow that basic principle. For one, it was very easy for the carts just to get stuck somewhere else on the field. I think everyone who played that game finally realized that you can also just shoot a roller coaster really far on an incomplete track and just end the lives of 20 little pixelated humans very quickly. It always has to come back around. That's the way the roller coasters are. You always end up where you started. And the reality is the Christian life was just never meant to be that way. God has been calling us into something greater. And when we find ourselves stuck in that kind of roller coaster rut, well, then we need to figure out what is going on in our lives, what is preventing us from moving forward. The student stories that you heard this morning, a lot of them have to do with that basic idea of we want to move forward. We want to make a difference in this world. We don't want to just end up where we started. So go ahead and jump into John chapter 1. We're going to look at the life of Peter. Even as we're talking a little bit about John 15 in a little bit. The author of the book of John, he just has a really good way of putting things. He helps us understand characters who are trying to understand the messages that Jesus was talking about. So here's what happens. John chapter 1, verse 40 is going to be the calling of Peter. Now, if you've been around the church any length of time and you've heard the story of the calling of Peter before, you've probably actually heard one of the accounts in the other Gospels, because we usually think about Peter being out on a boat when Jesus comes to him. But in John, it's actually much more brief and to the point. He had a brother named Andrew who was a disciple of John, and John was pointing the way to Jesus. So in verse 40, this is what we see. Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, was one of the two who heard what John had said and who had followed Jesus. The first thing Andrew did was to find his brother Simon and tell him, "We have found the Messiah," that is the Christ, and he brought him to Jesus. Jesus looked at him and said, "You are Simon, son of John. You will be called Cephas," which, when translated, is Peter. So essentially, Peter's introduction to Jesus, at least in John's account, we don't get a lot of the detail here, but it's very quick. His brother brought him to him, which for me, I guess I don't really feel like that's how sibling relationships usually work. And that's a good opportunity to pull someone's leg. Hey, I found the Messiah. Come see him. But here he is, Peter. He's trusting his brother that he's onto something, and he follows him. And Peter's life is changed forever. And Peter is going to be the disciple who becomes the center of a lot of stories, because he's the guy who is willing to, kind of, as Elise talked about, take that risk, take that step. Go out and see what life might have for him when he begins to follow Jesus. And he gets to experience a lot of really incredible things. He does, for just a brief moment, gets to walk on water with Jesus. He, at times, gets to see Jesus in all of his glory and begins to experience things that most of us never will. And through all that, he realizes that following Jesus is everything. And that's what he wants to do with his entire life, is follow Jesus everywhere he goes. But he makes a lot of blunders along the way. Peter's the kind of guy who sometimes gets ahead of himself. He didn't fully understand everything that Jesus was going to say. At times, he was even arguing against Jesus to not do, Jesus wants to go to Jerusalem and get killed, and Peter's trying to stop him, because Peter just can't fully understand what's happening. Peter, he falls asleep when Jesus needs someone to pray with him. He brings a sword as though he can save the Messiah of the universe with cutting off a guy's ear. Like that's the kind of person that he is. He's just going to be out there. And ultimately, he denies Christ. He denies Christ 3 times in one of the hardest moments of human history, when Christ was falsely accused and ultimately would be killed. I don't think that Peter ever forgot that moment either. I think it stuck with him. Because for Peter, in the midst of all of his desire to follow Jesus, he just wasn't a perfect person. He wasn't someone who got it every step of the way. And here's what I like about the book of John, is that as Jesus is teaching us what it means to follow him, we have these concrete examples of people who were trying really hard and just couldn't always get it. And so when we read the scriptures, when we read something like the book of John, and Jesus gives us instructions that are hard to follow in our lives, we know that we're in good company, because even the people who spent time immediately with Jesus didn't always get it. Go to John chapter 15. John chapter 15 is where we spent most of our week at camp. This was kind of our centralized section of verses. And John 15:19 specifically, we'll get to that in a moment, and it was read earlier, was the verse that we really looked at to help us understand what it means to be a follower of Christ. But look at verse 5 in chapter 15. "I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me, and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. If you do not remain in me, you are like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire, and burned. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. This is to my Father's glory, that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples." The basic image here you have is this, that Jesus is the vine to which we are all attached. So we are the branches that are part of this vine. And so really, without Jesus then, we would wither and die. And so many people, they choose to live their life apart from that, and they miss out on the life source that is the vine. One of the things that Craig kind of talked about is this basic idea that the branches, then as they grow upward. They grow toward the sun to reflect, to absorb as much of the power of the sun as possible, as much of the nutrients as they can. And he was quick to remind us that it's very easy in that case to swap out the U and the O. And there's a metaphor there for who we are as people who grow toward Jesus. But the thing is, sometimes branches, they get a little bit sick and they can't support themselves and they start to droop over. If that happens, they're not going to get enough sunlight to survive. And so the vine dresser will come to those branches and try to pop them back up. And if they kind of get enough sunlight to grow healthy again, then fantastic. And if they don't, they just kind of wither, and they have to be chopped off, and really there's no other outcome for them than to be thrown into the fire. And so for we as Christians, we know this. We need to be attached to what Jesus is doing in our lives. We need to constantly be going back to him. And this is how we become people who bear fruit. I asked a couple of my students what they thought that meant. And it's kind of hard to figure out what it means to bear fruit sometimes. What does that actually look like? What, as Christians, are we supposed to be able to show for a relationship with Jesus? As we got into it, I really think that a sign of bearing fruit is when you actually begin to change the world around you. When the world tastes a little bit of it and realizes that there's another way of living. And when that happens, a lot of people are going to be really excited about what they see. And possibly through us, as we choose to love one another and choose to show what the kingdom of God is like, it might be possible then for them to catch a vision of that. And the fruit that we bear is so tasty to them, they want to be part of it. But it's not tasty to everyone. For some people, it's actually just downright offensive. Go ahead and go to verse 18. This is something that Nathaniel read for us earlier. If the world hates you, keep in mind that it hated me first. If you belong to the world, it would love you as its own. As it is, you do not belong to the world, but I have chosen you out of the world. That is why the world hates you. Remember what I told you, the servant is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will persecute you also. If they obeyed my teachings, they will obey yours also. In the middle of this explanation about the idea of us being attached to the vine, he's reminding us that we are going to face the same kinds of things that Jesus faced. As Jesus faced persecution, so should Christians who are following him. It's kind of part of the deal. We shouldn't be afraid of it or shy away from it. It's actually part of following Christ. But here's the thing. I actually don't like to use the word persecution very much to describe Southern California. And the reason I don't like to use the word is because we have only the same words used to reference Christians around the world who oftentimes end up losing their lives or face serious loss of property or have lost family members because they are Christians. People around the world who have different beliefs and are hostile to the idea of Christianity being present in their culture oftentimes end up taking their lives or making life really difficult for Christians around the world. And the truth for us is, it's just not quite the same. I asked a couple of my students if they ever felt persecuted at school, and kind of almost the universal answer, with a few exceptions, but almost the universal answer was no. Just being a Christian by itself isn't really grounds for persecution most of the time. We live in a fairly tolerant society. You can wear pretty much any label that you want, and wearing the label probably isn't going to get you any sort of harm in most cases. For them, being a Christian is no worse off than being a Muslim or a Jew or any other label that you might put on it. And so really, persecution then for Christianity here just doesn't seem very strong in that sense. Like, people aren't going to typically bully you just because you're a Christian. But nonetheless, Jesus is saying something here that is remarkably profound. And the word persecution may be a little bit odd for us, but here's what I think he's trying to say, especially in our context, in what we face. We don't face persecution always in a life-threatening sense. But the reality is, for people, when we are really following Christ, we're going to live our lives so differently that people aren't going to know how to respond. And the result may be either hostility or just downright confusion. They won't know what to do with us. I mean, think about it. When you have a world in which the only way we know how to deal with violence is more violence, and Christians say maybe there's another way that doesn't require the sword, well, you're already starting to step on some toes about how the world works. When you take a world that has a lot of hate and you replace it with the love of Christ who loves all people, that also kind of makes some people feel like they don't know how to process those kinds of things. I think especially in our neighborhoods around here, in our culture, one of the big things that people face is loneliness. And a lot of times it's due to a well-crafted isolation that they put themselves in. And when Christians say, we're going to break through that and we're going to enter into community together and we're going to do life together, people don't know how to respond to that either. It oftentimes feels like intrusion. And when you're in a culture that has resigned itself to the idea that death is the final word, and we say, no, it's not, we have a hope that's greater for it, we're just going to sometimes be called stupid. That's the way it kind of works. I don't think I want to use the word persecution for that, because I think I want to save it for things that are just a little bit more imminent. But there's something real to it. There's something that you can't deny there that says that we as Christians are just a little bit different than everybody else. And so the fruit that we bear then has to reflect that. And some people are going to respond well, and others are going to be so thrown off and so offended to their own way of living that they just can't tolerate it. And those things happen not just when we wear the label as Christian, but when we actually start to live that out with our lives. When we actually start to live differently. And for a lot of these students, we've just heard their stories about how they want to live differently. how they want to actually go out into their world and begin to make changes in themselves, yes, and in the lives of people around them. And for me as a youth pastor, that's just so fun to hear, because I actually believe that these students can do that. I've heard a lot of their stories, and I'm so excited for the fall and what some of them are going to do, even at the schools they're at. Because a lot of them, and sometimes I find myself in this situation too, I think we feel like sometimes we're just on this roller coaster ride. At some point in our life, we've said the prayer, if you will. We've accepted Jesus into our heart, is sometimes the language that we use. And we've declared him to be Lord, but somehow our lives just haven't changed. Somehow we're just going around the track, constantly ending up where we started. And this sort of was the reality that Peter faced. Look at John 21. Peter's in a fishing boat with a number of the other disciples. Fishing is what he knew, so it was comfortable. He was back at it. Now in John 21, Jesus has already been killed and resurrected, and he's actually shown up twice to the disciples already, so it's not a secret that he's alive again. This is the third time that he's going to show up to them. But Peter is out there on a boat fishing once again. Verse 4, early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. He called out to them, "Friends, haven't you any fish?" "No," they answered. He said, "Throw your net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some." When they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. The disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It is the Lord." As soon as Simon Peter heard him say, "It is the Lord," he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he had taken it off, and jumped into the water. The other disciples followed in the boat, towing the net full of fish, for they were not far from shore, about 100 yards. Which, 100 yards isn't that far when you're in a boat, but when you're Peter and you've just jumped into the water, that's a football field that he has to swim. That would do me in, so I don't know. He was really excited to see Jesus. Really excited. I mean, this was the guy he had dedicated his life to following, and he still wanted to do that. And yet lingering in the back of his mind is the knowledge that he had just recently denied him 3 times. And Peter wants so desperately to be close to Jesus, but had just found no way to figure out how to do that anymore. He didn't know what to do. And so we find Peter doing the same thing he was doing at the start, fishing. And Jesus is going to call him out on it. Look at verse 15. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," he said, "you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." And again, Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He answered, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Take care of my sheep." The third time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, "Do you love me?" He said, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." And Jesus said, "Feed my sheep." 3 times Peter denies Jesus. 3 times Jesus asks him this question, "Simon, do you love me?" And Peter realizes this, that Jesus is calling him to something else than what he has always known. Every time Peter responds with, "Yes, Lord, I love you," he is commanded by Jesus to do the thing that he was always told to do. Go out into the world and take care of those who are pursuing the kingdom of God. Go out into the world and be someone who's going to make a difference. And the way Craig put it to us this week is simply this: you have gone back to what you know. You have gone back to fishing. This is where you started. After 3 years with me, are you really just going to go back to the same spot? Are you just going to ride this roller coaster around and around, never going anywhere? Or are you going to realize that following me means changing your course completely and heading toward a life in which the kingdom of God is made known to people? Are you going to stop fishing, go out and find people, and help them understand that the kingdom of God is near? Peter did that with his life. And the best we know from history, he spent his entire life from that point forward actively pursuing the kingdom of God, actively following Jesus, even though Jesus was no longer physically standing next to him. He understood more of what it meant to follow him, even sometimes after Jesus had left. And Peter fulfilled that in his life. We have students this last week who want to fulfill that with their lives, who stood up and said, "I don't want to just keep going on this roller coaster ride. I want to get off. I want to move forward. I don't want to be stuck in motion that never stops, but just keep going toward Jesus. I want to be like branches who stretch out toward the sun. I want to be moving to a place where I have the ability to impact this world for God, where I can bear fruit and make differences in people's lives." And we kind of joke about this idea of cry night because it's camp lingo, it's what we call it. Eventually, at some point in time, there will come a point during the week at camp where you have to do business with God, and sometimes we call that cry night. But Craig, the speaker, he was really careful to say, this isn't about emotion. This isn't about hype. This is a serious thing. For you to stand up and declare either that for the first time in your life or once again that you're going to follow God fully, that is a meaningful thing. And the hope is that for a lot of people, that would be the last time that they would have to stand. Because they would be so fully trying to follow God after that decision that they wouldn't need to rededicate, because that's just part of who they are. And so there were people in the audience who stood for the first time to accept Christ, and there were people who stood to rededicate, and there were people who sat. And many of the people who sat did so because they understood the gravity of the question. That if they were really going to stand, that meant that they had to radically alter the course of their lives to get off of the roller coaster ride. They had to begin to actually seek after Jesus and let that spill out to their friends, their families, to their schools. And that is a hard thing. As I talk to them, as I listen to them, it's exactly what they want to do. They want to be people who make a difference everywhere they go. I really do believe that you guys are capable of that. So I'm excited. I'm excited as a youth pastor to be part of what's going on in their lives, but I also know this. This is a question that we have to ask ourselves every day, and this is a question not just for students, but for all of us. Are we stuck on this roller coaster ride? Are we constantly just ending up back where we started when we first accepted Jesus into our lives? If we are, something is going wrong. We need to be willing to take some steps to get out of that rut. Sometimes it means talking to people who can help us. Sometimes it means spending a desperate amount of time in prayer, saying, God, get me off of this cycle. Help me to be someone who's living fully into your kingdom. And everywhere I go, help me to be someone who bears fruit. And that's something that each day, each of us have to decide that we want to do. So I'm going to pray for us, and a lot of the students who were at camp, we're going to pray through some kind of the same kinds of things that they already experienced, but this is something that doesn't go away. And for the rest of us, we get to make that same decision. Is this a time where we need to get off the roller coaster ride and begin following Jesus even more fully with our lives? God, just thank you for what you've been doing. Thank you for what you've shown me in this last week and how you've so incredibly and powerfully worked in the lives of these students. God, I pray that you would bless their efforts as they continue to give everything they have to you, that they would make a difference in their youth groups and their families, with their friends, at their schools. Like, God, you would bless those things, and people would know that they are Christians, not just by name, because they bear fruit everywhere they go. God, as a congregation, help us to be a people who make that same decision. That when we feel like we're stuck on the roller coaster ride, God, help us to have the courage to ask for help to get off. God, deliver us as people into those who would actually follow you with our whole lives, like Peter after the incident in John 21, willing to give everything to you. God, may you be given all the glory through all that we say and do. In your name we pray.